Remember last time we did Amazing Animals? Yeah. And I asked you to go through and find the animals that you thought were the most amazing and tell me why. Do you remember that? Yeah. And some of you picked the mayfly. Do you remember why you thought the mayfly was so amazing? This was a difficult text for second grade, and this was a class that there were a number of deficient readers in. And there were probably maybe 5 or 6 out of these children reading at a second grade level, probably 3 or 4 reading at a second grade level, and 1 or 2 reading well above, and at least 5 or 6 reading well below. So let's go to the page that says Introduction. Introduction. And I'm going to read it out loud, and you follow along with me for this part. Everybody got it? The world is full of strange and interesting animals. This is essential, and it's in many lessons, but since some of these kids are not proficient readers, the way to bring them in is to have them follow along while I read it out loud. In the initial reading, as you know, we were doing that. We did that twice. But even when we go back, again, these kids are following along. So the less proficient readers get a chance to hear the text read and follow it along multiple times in the course of the lesson. What worries me is sometimes teachers might read aloud and not have the kids follow along. And that's important because there's a difference. One of the great confusions that worries me about the Common Core is there's a difference between comprehending a text and learning. And there's a lot of confusion between comprehending a text and learning. If you read the text out loud and the kids don't follow along, they're just listening, they may learn about that text, but they're not becoming more proficient readers. So everything with a Common Core that is involved in these lessons has to be something that enhances their comprehension of the text while simultaneously making them a better reader and writer. If they follow along, it's enhancing their comprehension of the text, but it's also making them a better reader and writer. And that's as true at the 11th grade as it is right here at the second grade.
You did that when you came to the boldface text. It would have been so easy to just assume that the kids would know what a boldface word meant, but you stopped, you taught them the word, you had them guess what it might mean when something is in bold, and then you not only were teaching them about the animals, but you were teaching them about a text feature and showing them like how important it is to stay so close to the text and how important it is to pay attention to what the author is telling you, not only through the words, but how they're presented. And I thought that was great. I can imagine it would have been just so simple to roll right over and think, boldface, I know what that means, they must know what that means, and continue.
Well, those characteristics of print, italics. Yeah. Why did the author put it in italics? Here's a picture, there's a caption underneath. What does that mean? I mean, teaching those kids those explicit characteristics of text, can be, especially starting them at a young age, so when they get to me in 8th grade, they know what those things are, and you're not having to reteach all those things.
Right. But, one thing I can say that I appreciate, it seemed like you integrated that whole thing. Like some teachers, and I know that they will spend an entire lesson just over text structure for nonfiction text. Did you do any of that? Did the teacher do any of that with, this is what an informational text looks like, but or did you just dive into it and teach the features along the way?
The latter. We dove in, we taught the features along the way, and we integrated everything. Take your pencil and cross out the first 2 letters of unusual. Cross out the first 2 letters of unusual. We crossed out the first 2 letters, and what do we have? Usual. And what does it mean?
Like normal things and like things that you usually see every day. And
normal things you see every day. Very good. This would be an example of what we were just talking about. Rather than that, within the text, you can embed lessons on not only vocabulary, but prefixes and suffixes. That doesn't mean that a teacher can't enhance those lessons with some kind of review or some kind of game or some kind of worksheet. There's nothing wrong with that. But embedding it in the context of the text is something that is, I think, called for and a very strong part of the Common Core.
David, we've talked in the past about how oral language development, kids being able to express themselves, being able to express those ideas. And you were saying earlier that at lower grades, it's critical to build those skills, because by the time they get to 12th grade, if they haven't developed those skills, they're going to be deficient. And it shows up not just in their oral expression, but it shows up in their reading, it shows up in their writing. If they can't express what they want orally, then those skills are going to be stifled.
And if they're going to develop their academic language orally, that has to be through discussing complex text and through listening to complex text read aloud, which is why this is not a read aloud lesson, because the students have read this text, which is very complex for second grade, but it's why the Common Core standards in K-2 emphasize the reading aloud on a regular basis of rich, academic, complex language.
So in the example from the video, the student was struggling with that word ability, and they were given examples. Has there been a time, and I know there has, but what do you do when students don't come up with the correct answer for a complex vocabulary word?
I think that's really important. You throw out a question, and it could be a vocabulary question or it could be a comprehension question, and it's too hard. You make them think. You make them wrestle with it for a minute, and that's a really pivotal notion. Because even if no one gets the answer, if they've wrestled with it for a moment or so, the answer means more because they've tried to think about it. I think that that's true for, as I said, vocabulary, and it's true for a question about a character's motivation or a question where they have to synthesize 3 pieces of information from the text, and you ask it, and they can't do it. And you ask them to think about it for a few minutes. And then you have to explain it to everybody. The common procedure, very common, is for teachers to find the most difficult portions in the text and explain what it means before the kids have had a chance to wrestle with it on their own. What we're trying to do with the Common Core is clearly to give them the questions and have them wrestle with it, and even if no one gets it, then it's explained afterwards. But that explanation means more after they've wrestled with trying to get the answer. The other thing that makes me think about is how do you determine what question is too complex, too difficult, is beyond the kids? And there's no rules for that, but I can certainly say that you don't find the ceiling by crawling around on the floor. You have to be up there, and then you may bump your head, but even when you bump your head, you learn something from it.
What is the balance that you notice or a shift that you see with Common Core as far as literary text and nonfiction text?
In K-5, the Common Core calls clearly for half the text children read to be nonfiction or informational text, and half the text can be literary fiction. And that's a guideline that teachers can usually follow, because it's in elementary school, it's usually, although not always, one teacher with the children all day. So that's a guideline, and teachers, as I said, can follow it. In terms of how much complex text, this question comes up a lot. What part of the day, how much of the day should children be involved with this kind of complex text? And this can't be all day. The second graders can do this for 20, maybe 25 minutes, and then they can do it for another 20 or 25 minutes at another portion of the day. But it can't be their entire day. They still have to read text that is at their level. And if they don't read text and a sufficient volume of text that is at their level that they can read, then their fluency won't develop, their stamina for reading won't develop, and to some extent, to a considerable extent in the elementary years, their vocabulary won't develop. So it can't be only complex text. And complex text does develop fluency the way we do it in these lessons, and it does develop vocabulary clearly, and it does develop stamina. It's very hard to stay with the text like this, even with the teacher leading the questions for 25 minutes for second graders. But they still need a volume of reading that is at their level, and that could come from free choice independent reading, or it could come from social studies or science text that teachers are using where they have different levels of text, some for the less proficient readers, some for the more proficient readers. So this cannot be all day.
What about for kindergarten teachers?
That has to be through read aloud. There's kindergarten. There are There are some children who come into school reading. There are some children who are reading when they're 3 or 4. But most children in kindergarten aren't reading. Some are reading very simple, basic text at the end of kindergarten. But what needs to drive kindergarten, and to a great extent first grade and still second grade, is read aloud of complex text. And all the text that is read aloud should be rich, complex text.